Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Joanna Daniel, and I'm here with Eddie Hypolite today. This is the 288th episode of the Stories That Shape Us podcast. I know it's a daily podcast, and we're leading up to Father's Day. I was listening to Eddie has a podcast called The Four Questions. You should follow him on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, and some of the places. We'll talk about it later. But I was listening to one of Eddie's episode called Chasing Daddy, and that was about in May, I think it was. But I knew that I
Yes.
wanted to.
Yeah.
It was May. It was May. I knew that I wanted to come and have this conversation with you, Eddie, about that because there's so much in it that we can talk about that I
Mm,
believe that Wolf's
mm,
Scarf audience can learn from. So welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you.
Yeah.
We enjoy these conversations. Our conversation is it seems to be just a rolling conversation. It seems to,
It,
yeah,
yeah, it is. It
yeah.
is.
It's
No,
like one of those conversations that's always on tap. All right, let me just turn on this
always.
tap. Let's get a conversation. We both take a good drink. We get back into life. Come back. Switch on the tap again. So it's good to be back. Good to be back and drinking with you.
Thank you, thank you. I love having these conversations because there's so much in it that I learn from and that I know I just want to share with the people who are in our community because I know that they'll learn from it too.
hmm
So that in that, do you want to tell the story that triggered that um, podcast episode of Chasing Daddy?
Well, my dad left when I was five. Finally left the family home when I was five. Never came back again. And I have the distinct memory of running after my father and crying and begging him to come home. You know, I've written about it. I've spoken about it. Used it on multiple times, um, multiple times. And just before my mum passed in 2020. It was about 2019. Uh, I remember speaking with my. Can you hear that feedback?
Are you hearing the feedback? Let me
Yeah.
mute while you talk and see if it's still the same.
Um, can you hear it? No, I can't hear it now. Oh, okay, okay. I remember um, speaking with my mum and telling her about it, and she said that wasn't you. It wasn't you who was running after your brother. It was after your father. It was my late brother Wayne. I said, no, mum. At the time, mummy was 93. So I'm thinking, all right, maybe mum's memory. But my sister, the eldest in our family, she was over from Grenada and she was staying with my mum. And I told her the story. And she said, no, because I said, oh, mum said it was Wayne. She said, yeah, it wasn't you, it was Wayne. She said, you were standing there, but it was Wayne. And then I had this flashback, Joe. And I remember it. I saw it as clear as day. It was actually Wayne running after. I was standing with one of my older sisters. Wayne was running down the road after him. But he had made such an indelible mark. It had seared so deep into my consciousness that I had convinced myself after all these years that it was me, that I was the one who was chasing my daddy. And it became a metaphor. I wrote about it, I speak about it on numerous occasions. And in the podcast, it became a metaphor for me just chasing my dad. Not so much to catch up with him, to beg him to come home, because, once my dad left, he just stayed gone. He always stayed on the periphery of our lives. He was close enough to be seen, but never close enough to be present. He just stayed on the periphery. I always say that my relationship with my dad was like an 11 question relationship. Hi dad, how you doing? How you feeling? And then, yeah, once you get to question 11, then it's crickets because what other conversation can I have here? Because we hadn't built up enough he hadn't built up enough emotional credit with me. He hadn't built up enough lived credit with me for me to really know, for me to have any deep and meaningful conversation with him. So the chasing wasn't so much for him to come home. The chasing throughout my life has really, once I've come into a sense of who I am, figuring out who I am as a Hypolite male, figuring out you become aware of yourself. You become aware of the strength of your personality. You become aware of the strength of your own personal aura. We all carry aura. We all carry energy. We all carry personality. We all carry the ability to influence, some more than others. I became aware of mine early. And then, especially once I got into my 20s and then I got into my 30s, I became really much more aware of it. So chasing daddy was about how do I chase the person, the father, the experiences that are going to give me a sense of who I am and who I'm supposed to be in the world. Because I believe that's the role of your parents. I believe that's the role of your mothers. That's the role of your fathers. They're supposed to give you a sense of who you are, why you are, what comes down the DNA, what comes what comes down the line. You realize that you're a mosaic of everyone. I'm the tallest in my family. My dad was, I'm 6'1". My dad wasn't a tall man. My dad was 5'11" at the most. But my dad's brother, he was 6'5". So I'm like, oh, all right then. So I picked up some of Uncle Urban's genes in the DNA. I picked up some of that height. My brother Wayne, we used to call him Chinese. When you look at him, he just looked like he looks Chinese. He looks Oriental. And I just look at my dad. You know what I mean? My dad blacker than me. You know what I mean? My mom fair skin. We look at Wayne like, how is that possible? Then I saw my mom's sister, Auntie Juliet. Lord have mercy, she looked like Wayne is her child. So I'm realizing, when you realize all of the stuff that comes down, chasing daddy was about chasing that authority, chasing that voice, chasing that wisdom that, would have given me a sense of who I am, and help me to navigate, navigate,
And that's what I love about it, the summary of what that meant, what the chase meant to you. And it's only as an adult that you can look back and go, that's what I wanted, really. I wanted just to know who I was, and he could tell me. And that's what I wanted. And so later on, you talked about how those stories, because you didn't get the answers, how
No.
those stories can tell ourselves, and that's not an empowering story. And so you said it's easy for us to see ourselves in our trauma story, but fail to see how we also have empowered stories of our own making. How did you make that into an empowered story?
I think, I said in the podcast that stories, disappointment, loss, upheaval, even success, victory, overcoming, but specifically loss, disappointment, heartbreak. They tell three stories. They tell stories to you. They tell stories about you, and if you're not careful, they'll tell stories through you. They will tell stories through you. And I feel like in my younger days, while I was, going through what I was going through in my adolescence years, and like I said, I never. I'm the youngest of 10 children. My family's large. When I was 5 years old, the first nephew in my family was born when I was 5. So by the time I was 10, I was an uncle. And then I was an uncle at 10 years old. I was an uncle to three children. You know what I mean? So that by the time I'm 15, by the time so my family was so big, I didn't really know that I didn't have time to miss my dad. I didn't. I think those who are older, well, they had different relationships. And I feel like we all in our family had different relationships with the idea of our father. Our family was so big. The history of our family took place in two places. It took place in the Caribbean. You know what I mean? I'm born 1965. So there's a whole history that takes place in the Caribbean. And then there's a whole history that comes to England and takes place in England. You know what I mean? We arrive in 65. My dad finally leaves my mum after 10 children, after 10 children, 30 something years of married, finally leaves her around about 72. So now that's a whole new history now. Mummy never brings another man home. She never brought another man home. So I never saw my mum with another man. I've never seen my mum with another man my whole life. Never seen my mum with another man. So I think those type of things, in some ways, they begin to tell stories to you, stories about how you love, stories about how you don't love. I think maybe in some ways they begin to tell stories to you about your worth and about your value, about whether or not you're worthy of love, about whether or not your parents, whether or not your parents, truly loved you, um, whether or not whether or not you can make it, whether or not you're gonna make it. And I think once we become aware of ourselves and aware of how our lives are shaping, we have to ask ourselves the question, excuse me, what stories are shaping you? You know what I mean? The way in which you love, what stories are shaping you? The way in which you think about relationships, what stories are shaping you? Because we all shape ourselves out of a narrative that we listen to, that we're exposed to, that we're working through. You know what I mean? And that's why I said, I honestly do believe stories, upheaval, they tell stories to us, they tell stories about us, and they tell stories through us. However, we get to tell the stories of us, and we get to tell the stories for us. Those are two, but those come in the space of you now questioning the stories that you've always had. You know what I mean? I think my experience that came at 25. My experience of that came at 25. Um, when I made a conscious decision in my life to really begin to rewrite my story. I had a very turbulent adolescent teenage years, early 20s, At 25, I said, okay, no more. No more. The stories that I've been heard so far, and I've been written off so many times in my life anyway. You know what I mean? When I was in secondary school, um, and this was around about 1977, 78. I remember sitting in front of an educational psychologist because I used to get suspended a lot from school. And the educational psychologist said the problem with Eddie, Mrs. Hypolite, is that he is uneducatable. Yeah. History now has taught me, and history has shown me that we were, as young Caribbean kids, because there were two group of kids that were written off that way. Young black British born boys like ourselves, that first generation from Caribbean parents, and young white Irish boys. And we were part of an education system that had already declared us subnormal, that had no intention of educating Caribbean boys. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that my I'm not saying that my behavior didn't contribute to some of that, but I
That would have
ended
been
up in a say again.
that would have been some powerful shaping, your
Oh,
uneducated.
powerful, powerful, powerful. Because in some ways I acted it out, because it was telling stories through me, and I acted it out. However, I got to, on a pause, I got to a community homeschool. I was placed there by the courts. I was taken out of my house, ended up in remand, a place called Stanford House, ended up in assessment in Stanford House for 6 weeks, and then I ended up in a community homeschool for young delinquent boys. I ended up in the engineering workshop of a man called Cliff German, Mr. German. And I ended up, it was a school where you didn't get an education, you got a trade. I ended up in his engineering workshop. And I remember one morning, I just loved being in his class. Very working class, as cockney as the day is long, married a Scottish girl, introduced us to Billy Connolly and that Scottish humor. But he was such a natural educator. And he gave me a piece of work one morning, Joe, that he was convinced would last me the whole morning. He had taught me how to do arc welding. We had learned how to do arc welding, and we built a little makeshift booth. And he gave me these pieces of metal, and he said, "All right, this will last you all morning." I did it in about 15 minutes. Went to him. I said, "Sir, I'm finished." He said, "No, you're not finished yet." He said, No, you're finished." I went. He came and he saw the work, and he was, and he looked at me and he went, "All right then." And then he gave me a piece of work that actually lasted me all morning. It was a very complicated piece of work, But what he had done, he had unlocked my capacity to absorb information and to give it back. And so he tapped into that. I didn't realize that now, you realize these things on reflection, but he was now empowering me to tell stories of me and tell stories for me. That's what he was doing at that very early age, by connecting me with myself. And I think for me at 27, I met the lady that I married, and I went on to marry. She was my girlfriend. We'd become best friends, and then we decided, but look, let's just go from best friends to going out with each other. And then within 2 years, we were married. Before the marriage, Joe, I had convinced myself that I was going to fail, and I didn't understand that. That's when the gap, and that's when the chasing daddy really caught up with me, because it was coming to marry. I realized I don't know what it is to be a husband. I don't know what it is to be a father. I don't know what it is to be a provider, because I'd never seen it modeled. I had never seen it modeled. And then, believe me, it all caught up to me. And I was quietly panicking. I was going through this quiet panic. I didn't even tell Yvonne about it. But I was convinced that I was going to fail. I was convinced I was going to be a failure. And then I remember God speaking to me. I remember God speaking into my spirit. And God asked me a very simple question. God said, "Eddie, I know you didn't see it as a child. And I know you never saw it as a young man. But what did you deserve to see? In your home, what did you deserve to see?" And I remember telling him, in this conversation was going on in my head. I remember telling him all the things that I deserved to see. I deserved to see modeled in front of me. I deserved to see around me. I deserved to experience, And I remember God saying, "All right, marry the girl and I'll teach you how to do it. But you have to be committed to the work that comes with becoming what you deserve to see. That's what you have to do." And yeah, it's clearly as day in my head. He said, "I will send the people around you that will model it. I will even send dysfunctional people around you to model what not to be." You know what I mean? And we got married. And back in April 25th, we celebrated 30 years. You know what I mean? We celebrated 30 years. And
That's
so,
amazing.
and so that there again. And I think that really is what connects with this thought that I've always had. When people write you off, just remind them that God writes with a bigger pen. Yeah. But you have to live into and live out of the stories that he writes into your opportunities, into your journeys, into the people that surround you. And so that's where I talk about now, where you get to now tell stories of you and tell stories for you. Yeah. Yeah.
And that is so powerful. I mean, listening to you, there's so many things that I see that we can learn from in terms of the stories. Because one, when you was talking now about where your stories began, your family stories, I
Mm,
felt like you were able to widen the frame a little bit. Because
mm,
sometimes just this period of our lives can tell us stories about ourselves.
mm,
We're not looking at any other period in our lives. So
mm,
we're not
mm,
learning about ourselves from a wider frame,
mm,
just this
mm,
narrow, my father left, or he wasn't available, or, this is the trauma that I experienced. And
mm,
so that alone can tell us who we are. But you widen the frame. Like my story started in the Caribbean. There was a part of my story starts here, and then there was another part that started in 1972. And then as you learn to tell stories about you in the workshop that day, as you're reflecting on, so this woman says I was uneducatable, but here is somebody who I was learning things about myself that I didn't know about myself. And so it's a whole journey of discovering, so we can change the narrative, so we can start to tell stories about ourselves, for ourselves.
absolutely, absolutely, Joe. And it's kind of remembering that your story isn't, as long as you're living, your story is being written. Yeah, you can turn on your mic. I feel like this gap, this side. I'm not hearing it.
Oh, it's gone now. It's gone, right? Yeah,
Just as long as as long as you're living, your story's been written.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. As long as you are alive, your story's been written. So stop 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 reading into your past chapters. I remember once my sister and I got into a big argument. Big sister. There's three of us. The three eldest, sorry, are all women. And the one that I was arguing, she's the firebrand. She's the firebrand. And I remember her looking at me and she says, "You're nothing. Look at you. You're nothing. You ain't never been nothing. You ain't never gonna be nothing." You know what I
Mm.
mean? Now, when my sister said that to me, I was 42 years old.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Now, if my sister would have said that to 22-year-old Eddie Hypolite running the streets of West London Red back in the 80s, I would
Different
have been like,
outcome.
yeah, 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 you're probably right.
Yeah.
But not 42-year-old Eddie.
Mm.
Come
Mm.
on. 42-year-old Eddie was married. I was a father. I was an ordained minister. I had a bachelor's and two master's degrees. I mean,
Mm.
just I'd traveled 6 continents. I'm just
Mm.
like,
Mm.
you can't be looking at 42-year-old me, tell me I ain't never been and I ain't never gonna be that. But that was because she had decided to read from chapter 22 of my life and not
She hadn't moved
update
on.
herself with me.
She hadn't moved on. She hadn't moved on.
Nah, she was stuck in 22, whereas
Yeah.
I'm living in chapter 42. You know
Yes.
what I mean? And so you cannot do nothing about people who only want to read from specific chapters. They want to they want to do selective reading of your life
Yes.
journey.
Yes.
You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yes.
And I've learned, like, you cannot allow people, you cannot make people see the growth and the excellence in you that they don't want to see.
Absolutely. I had a similar conversation this morning where I'm like, sometimes we have to release ourselves as well
Absolutely.
from how the things that we experience, the stories that trauma tell us, and how we
Mm,
lived it, because of the coping strategies that we had, because of the understanding that we didn't have about it. So we even have to release ourselves, because there are people who won't release us. There's some people who will read from those chapters, as you say, because they've been caught up. And if we allow it, people will continually, and trauma and experiences will continually tell us about ourselves if we don't ground ourselves in, wait, this is reality, this is who I am, this is where I am, these are the things that I've done, this is how I've developed resilience, this is where I find strength and courage, and I am determined. And oftentimes people can't see that unless we show it to them. Sometimes when I'm in therapy with people saying, but did you hear the resilience? Can you hear the resilience in your story? They can't hear it.
And where do you find it? I mean, you find it in the space. You you find it in the place where where the trauma robbed you of the ability
Yes,
to tell your own stories. You know,
yes, yes,
that's where you
yes,
find it. In the
yes,
space where it robbed you of the ability to tell your own stories despite everything that you've been through. You
yeah.
know, and it's important that you understand that loss doesn't get to tell the whole story.
It
When we
doesn't.
remember that we get to tell the stories of us and for us,
Yeah.
you know, because
And
our life is constantly in that space of transitional growth. You know, we
constant.
come through despite the odds, you know, and we
Yeah.
get to tell the stories.
Yes, we come through. And that's why I do inner child healing work. I love to do it. I do a group, only 3 women I allow at a time, because it's such a it's archaeologic work, I think, because we're doing like lots of digging to find those stories
Mhm.
that to rewrite them,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
rewrite those stories, and to learn to tell stories about ourselves.
Mhm.
Because I think, as we're talking about father issues leading up to Father's Day, I've been focusing on the podcast, because not having a father, or not having an emotionally available father, can be such a powerful determinant of somebody's future if they don't allow
Absolutely.
themselves to tell a different story, to read the whole chapter and to widen the frame some more, so you can see more of your story, more of your life, more of who you are, and the things that you've done and accomplished. Otherwise, we stay tunnel vision just on that one. I think sometimes it's a desire, because we still desire it, we still want it, and the child that never had it still desire it, so it
Yeah,
holds back sometimes the adult from living
yeah,
a fuller story.
yeah, yeah. And and accepting the fact that, you know, this is the one thing that I do understand, yeah, Joe. In every generation of parents, in a family, in a family line, I think the one of the major responsibilities of parents is to look at what's come down the family
Yeah.
tree.
Hmm.
You won't be able to stop everything, but at least pick 2 or 3 things, you know what I mean, and say, um, yeah, this stops with me.
Hmm.
This
Hmm.
history stops with me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This history, this, you know, generational, this stops with me. I am gonna block this in my, so that my children see this, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to remember that, yeah, I mean, my ability to speak, my
Yeah. Hmm.
ability to communicate, that's my
Mm.
father.
Mm.
That's my
Mm.
father all day long. If you would,
Mm.
I lived with my dad. I ended up living with my dad. You know, my mom, she was such a powerfully brilliant woman. You know, with all that my mom went through with my dad, you know, she never badmouthed to us. Never badmouthed him to us. She never sang his praises, but she never badmouthed him to us. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? We knew it was wrong. So, you know, I would ask my mom in my 20s questions about my dad. And she said, if you want to know, go live with your dad. Go live with your dad. And in the end, she got so sick of it, and she kicked me out the house. She said, as a matter of fact, get out of my house, man. You ain't doing nothing here. Go live with your father. And she
Right.
threw me out the house. And I went and I lived with my dad. He was living over in Tottenham at the time. I was down in Fulham. He was living over in Tottenham. I went and I lived with him for about 4 months. And in that 4 months, yeah, everything I needed to know about my dad, I
You
learned.
learn.
Yeah. I learned in 4 months. You know what I mean? I saw the gifts that I was conscious of in myself in my 20s. I was like, oh, that's where I get it from. Oh, all right. So that's where this comes from. Ah, oh, all right. Yeah, I see where that comes from. You know.
Mm.
Um, and I think he became too conscious of the fact that I was seeing into him, and he was like, like the place is too small. Talk to your mom about coming home. And he was out one day. I got home. I got back from work. I'd already sorted it out with my mom. I just packed my bags and I left. I didn't
You
even
went
say,
back.
yeah. I moved back to my mom's house. Um, but I remember at 95, I was recording my mom's life story at 90. She had me at 40. So in the year that I turned 50, she turned 90. It's a big thing.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I was recording her life story, and she was telling me telling me some stories about the early days, early times of her life. So, like, I think between about 18 and 22, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? She got married young to my dad. She married him about 2021. And she talked
Right.
about the early years of our marriage, and just, it was rough. You know what I mean? It was rough. My mother became pregnant with my eldest sister. They weren't married, and out of duty, you obviously marry. And although he was with my mom, he didn't truly love my mom. You know what I mean? Not the way in which she loved him.
Right.
And so I remember she was telling me about times he would be away working abroad, etc., etc. And then she went to tell me something, and it literally went like this. There was one time with your father when it's okay, don't worry. And
Oh
she just moved
wow.
on with the story.
She was
And it
she was
was such a profound, instructive moment for me. So instructive because without even knowing it, she said at least three things. Number one, you weren't ready for what I was about to tell you. Number two, actually, that's just between me and your father. And number three, that's just none of your business. And it made me realize, as children, we can carry water for our parents,
mm-hmm.
thinking that we know their story, and you don't know their story.
Do not.
Listen,
Yeah.
as a married woman, I know as a married man, there's things in the relationship between me and my wife we don't even talk about, let alone talk to our daughter about.
Absolutely.
Oh my God. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
my daughter said, Dad, tell me about your early day. And I will go through my stories like the old DJs with a record box looking at which record they're gonna play. Yeah, I'm like, nah, I
Yeah.
can't play you that one. I pull out that album, like, all right, I can play you at least this track. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But
Yeah.
that made me realize that as children, we are not our parents and we are our parents because we carry it. But just because we carry it, it doesn't mean we have to be. Just because we're born into it, doesn't mean that we have to receive. We don't have to be the continuation of it. We
Of it.
do get to choose to tell stories of us and for us.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't see it, my question is always going to be, what did you deserve to see?
Mm, mm,
What did you
mm-hmm.
deserve to see? Because you can chase that. You can find that. You can find couples around you that will mentor that into you
And model that for you.
and
Yeah.
model it for you. You know,
Yeah.
So it's. I think for fathers, the great. I think for us as fathers, the great challenge is being honest about where our journeys have come from, and
Mm,
and being true to where we want our journeys to end up.
absolutely. There's so much like it has to stop with me, for example, takes work. And I think if you're prepared to do the work, as I was saying to you before we come on, it expands you because that's what I'm
Yeah,
finding. It,
yeah,
it grows you. It creates so much depth and space in you that I couldn't imagine not doing it. Because otherwise, the stories that is told through us just repeats the cycle. Now,
yeah.
my husband, his his father left when he was, I think, 5.
Hmm.
His father left. Was a provider, long distance, but his father's father left when he was 11. he never saw him again, right? And so we got married, and my husband loves missions. He's doing missionary work, and he left twice to go do missionary work. And I'm looking at it going, a pattern is being repeated here.
Yeah.
I said, it's the same leaving.
Mm.
It's a month, it's 3 weeks, but it's leaving because I saw the boys completely change immediately. Their behavior didn't become bad, or they didn't become disruptive, but something shifted that I noticed, and I said, something shifts every time you leave.
Mm.
And if you go again, I'm making a decision now to break the cycle. I'm like, if you this is what I'm these are the options that are available to me that I will explore. Okay. When he saw that, when he saw that he was just repeating a cycle as
But
much as he could.
spiritualizing it, repeating
I
it, but spiritualizing it.
Absolutely, because they loved him where he went. They did
Mm.
so much. They wanted the whole family to go. He's good at it, right? And he loves the Lord, and he wanted to serve him. But he was leaving. And whatever the reason why you were leaving, you were repeating a pattern for your
Mm.
boys. They were gonna have their story was gonna be my father left, even if it was sporadic, right? And so he made a decision. I'm never leaving again. My father made that decision too. And so now it means and this is Eddie has a book, Living Life from Here. It's called
Mm.
Eddie.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's now, how do I live life from this place of decision making
yeah,
that
yeah,
I've
yeah,
made? That
yeah.
I'm going to start to not allow the trauma to tell any stories through me. I am going to decide
Mhm.
how I live from here, and I'm changing the narrative for me, and I'm changing it for my children, so that
Mm.
we don't have the same story.
Yeah.
And that's powerful work. It's intentional work.
Mm.
The results are amazing and life changing.
Mm.
Because when a 16-year-old requests time with him, and his 13-year-old wait up to see him because I haven't seen him for 2 days because he leaves early and come home late, and he wants to just share the details of his life for the last 2 days with his dad. What that does is just there's you can't put a price tag on it, but it
Mm.
first required an awareness of, well, I'm just telling this story, I'm just repeating this pattern. I want
Mm.
to stop. It needs to stop with me, and this is how I'm going to do it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's powerful.
absolutely, absolutely, and it is so powerful. It is so, and it's so central to. It's so central to reclaiming what you feel was lost,
Yeah,
what you know
absolutely.
was lost. I
Yeah.
remember once Ria was in primary school. I think she was in about year 10, and I was at work, and working at the university. Her school's just up the road. She had a bit of a feeling a bit had a bit of a tummy ache, but she went to school anyway. I said, listen, remember to take, she was feeling a little under the weather, but she wanted to go. So we said, okay, remember to take this little something to eat here, to take this other thing, and a little drink just for, a little energy drink. Anyway, in a haste and everything, she ran out of the place, and you know, forget it. So she calls me out. She went into the office, and she called me at work. I'm sitting down to have a coffee. Daddy, yes, Pun. Um, Daddy, can you bring the drink and that up for me, please? And I said, did you forget it? She said, like, yeah. I said, how did you forget it? You know what I mean? I said, I thought I told you to take it. She said, sorry, Daddy, but I was just sorry. Can you bring it for me? And I'm like, yes, all right then, I'll bring it. And I hung up the phone, just annoyed that she she had called me. You see, I'm starting to feel emotional even talking about it, stupid as it was. And then I was all overcome with emotion, Joe, because I think back to when I was a child, and the amount of times I would have wished I could have called my dad to come in and save the day.
Wow.
The amount of times I wished I could have called my dad, Dad, can you come and save the day? And my dad was
Mm.
nowhere to be found. And then I realized, hold on, I'm that dad.
You're that dad.
In this
You're,
moment, I'm that
yeah.
dad. My daughter's
Yeah.
called me, Dad, can you come and save the day?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was overcome at the table. I teared up. I teared
Right.
up. It was such a beautiful realization. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And that's what I mean. You get to tell the stories
You get to tell the
of
story
you, and you get to tell the stories for you.
for you. You've
Yeah.
broken
You tell the
something there
Yeah,
that
you
day.
get to tell the
Yeah.
stories of you, and you get to
Yeah.
tell the stories for
Yeah.
you. You get the stories that
Yeah.
have been told to you, the stories that
Yes.
have been told about you. Sometimes the stories that are told through you because you
Yes.
believe them. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yes.
Once you begin to really understand that your story is it's an ongoing saga. You know what I
Yes.
mean? That there's always new chapters, there's new sentences, there's new paragraphs. You
Yes.
can
Yes.
put a
Yes.
new footnote in, you know what I mean? Then it becomes an ongoing, you begin to rewrite it. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna go back and try and be revisionist on what happened. You know what I
Mm.
mean? But I
Mm.
realize now that there are things that I can see and find meaning to. You know what I mean? I remember when Yvonne and I had our engagement party.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about it in the book. And at the engagement party, my father was there. Um, all my family was there. Yvonne's family was there. Yvonne was raised by her grandmother. She's the matriarch. So Gran spoke, and then my mum spoke, and then dad, Yvonne's dad spoke, and my sister was sitting next to my dad, and she says, "Dad, have you got any advice for Eddie? Anything you want to tell him, Eddie?" And he was sitting next to me. Um, my dad was a lot older, a lot frailer than, and I remember him looking at me and saying, "Stand your ground and fight your battles like a man." You know what I mean? And obviously, we're there in front of everyone, and he was. I said, "Yes, Dad." In
Yeah.
that family we
Yeah.
don't do respect. It's one thing that we don't do. You know.
Right.
I said, "Yes, Dad. I will. Thanks, Dad." But in my mind, I was saying, "What? Like what? Like what you did for us?" Just move from here, man. I don't even know who bring you here and bun that about.
Yeah.
Serious. I wasn't happy with that. Stand your ground and fight your battles like a man. It was 15 years into our wet marriage. And Yvonne and I, there was a lot of pressure that were hit us at that time. Pressures of work, pressures of health, pressures socially. Yeah, they just hit us financially, all at the same time. And the two of us headed down the road of indifference. Now, the opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite
Whew.
of love is indifference.
A whole nother beast altogether.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And the two of us headed down my dad's way of not dealing was absenting himself.
Mm.
You
Hmm.
know what I mean? And I realized that I was beginning to mentally and emotionally
Absent.
absent myself. And then I heard my dad's words in my head 15 years later: stand your ground and fight your battles like a man. And I understood in that very public space what my dad was privately trying to tell me. He was saying, I know what's in you because
Mm.
I'm
Because it was
in you.
in me. Because it was in
And
me.
when life hits you, I know what you are probably likely to do. But when life hits
Woo.
you,
That is so
honestly,
that's
it was profound. It was profound. It was such a profound. And I realized he was saying, be more than me. Or even if he wasn't saying that, that's what I was hearing. Be more 15 years later, be more than me. When life hits you, do not absent yourself. Fight for your marriage, fight for your children. I was a father and a husband, a husband and a father then.
Mhm.
Fight for your wife, fight for your daughter, fight for your family, stand your ground and fight your battles like a man. Do not absent yourself. I realized that the message was be more than me, be more for yours than I was for you. You know what I mean? Well, by the time he had by the time he had that sunk, he had been dead. You know what I mean? He was long dead. But
By the time you understood what that meant.
by the time I understood what that meant, so I didn't have time to. I wasn't able to contact him and say, you know, I realized what he was talking about. He had passed. He had passed. You know. However, the story remained. You know what I mean? And the learning from that remained. We, even out of the loss, even out of the absence, you know, there is there is still so much if we're brave enough. And it takes courage. It takes courage. It takes courage. It takes being able to be around a good community
Absolutely.
of other
Yeah.
people, a good community of men, a good community of women. It
Yeah.
takes being able to be around accountability, you
Yes.
know, and allowing yourself as a man to experience the strength of vulnerability.
Mm, mm,
And you
mm,
can't be vulnerable with everyone, but
mm.
you have to be vulnerable. You can't be vulnerable with everyone, but you have to be vulnerable if you're gonna be strong.
Absolutely. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. There's no strength without
rugged,
it.
this rugged Western individualism. It's a lie. It's a lie.
Mm,
It's a lie.
mhm.
It's a lie. You know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it. You know, we
Mm,
we we. I'm around a lot of guys who I am father to. You know, and I am father of. I only have one biological child. You know what I mean? I have one biological child, but I have a few surrogate sons and a few
yeah.
surrogate daughters. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And it's important. It's important that you make yourself available with what you learn to pour it into the life of another. It's important. I think
Absolutely.
that all of that, you know, all of that, contributes to us being men, to us being fathers,
Mm,
to us
mm,
being present.
hmm. Hmm.
You know.
Absolutely.
So
There's,
yeah.
there's, there's so much there, Eddie. I mean, I'm so amazed, and I thank you for sharing that story about the request that your daughter made with can and the realization that came to you in that moment, and just how you were able to remember that that advice that was given to you 15 years later, and was
Mm,
able to use it. But it tells me of the work that you must have done to be able to make those connections and realizations and draw from them and use them
mm,
so that you can move forward. And so I want to talk about resilience, because I know you that's what you do.
mm,
I want to talk about resilience and the kind of resilience building that it will take to allow to give you, I was going to say the tools, willingness. I'm not sure if the word I'm looking for, but the strength, the determination to learn from the story, to shape your own story, so that the story that is told through you is completely different. You control the narrative.
mm,
Those are not controlling you anymore. How does somebody do that? Like, I know we know therapy is one way, and that's
mm,
what we do here at Wounds to Scars. We help people heal so
mm,
that they can control the narrative. So, but
mm.
what can somebody do to build resilience where they have a story of disconnection from their father?
Well, look, resilience is built in community. Yeah. What resilience is connected to? Resilience is actually connected to story. People don't realize that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's connected to story. They talk about soldiers. Um, the difference between regular soldiers and special forces is that the higher and the harder the battle gets, yeah, the calmer and much more in control and much more centered the special forces soldier becomes. Whereas the regular soldier is, "Ah!" But this one, calmer, and
Centers it.
yeah, the harder the battle gets, the more focused, and the the much more, the greater the upheaval in the fight, is the calmer they become. Why? Because they've been taught to do so. And so when life hits them, they remember who they are. They remember who they are. What resilience does, what resilience really does, is resilience reacts to life. Sometimes we don't know who, and that's why sometimes we don't know who we are or who we can be till everything is thrown up in the air. And then when
Ah,
everything is thrown up in the air, we realize, oh snaps, there's depths to us. I always say we dig down deeper in order to grow up stronger. And
yeah.
resilience isn't about the ability to bounce back necessarily. Resilience is about the ability to find depths so that on the outside you grow up stronger. You know what I
Mm,
mean? We
mm.
dig down deeper in order to grow up stronger. And that's why I say resilience is discovered in community, because you cannot see all the stories about yourself.
No.
You cannot even remember all the stories about yourself. Sometimes you have what I call hidden stories. And hidden stories are the stories that we forget about, or that we allow to fall out of our pocket as we go along the way. But because you travel in community, people remember those stories. Something happens and they pick it up and they put it in their pocket. Like, oh my gosh, that was such a great experience. Oh my gosh, I can't believe, you know what I mean? And then years down the line, or like, a year down the line, you're going through something, Joe, and you're like, man, I just feel just, you know what I mean, that I'm just not in control of this thing. And da, da, da.
Mm,
And then your
mm.
friend pulls the story out their pocket, like, oh, Joe, don't you remember when
Yeah,
when you said this? And you pick
absolutely.
up the thing and you're like, oh my gosh, when did
Absolutely.
you remember that? Like, yeah. And then you get that sense of, oh snaps, what am I chatting about, man? I'm going to Daniel, man. And then you're back. That is
I,
resilient, because
yeah.
it's a reminder. The story reminds you. You know what I mean? There are other times when you don't, there isn't anything that you can think back on. But where you stand, people can actually enable you to see the things that you can't see. All right, you ain't got nothing to look back on, but in the immediate you, this is what has come to the surface. And because this has come to the surface and you don't know how to properly articulate it, you don't know how to properly pin it down, you don't know how to properly name it or distinguish it, somebody around you or the community around you can say, no, 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 that is foresight. No, no, no,
Absolutely.
that's what it is. You have foresight.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, no, no, what it is that you have a greater level of depth and self-awareness. Your self-awareness is greater than you thought. And they're like, really? Is that what it is? Like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me show you how it works. And then when they explain it to you, you're like, oh, snaps. Yeah. All right, I see what you're saying. That now, that now becomes that thing that's inside of you, so that when life turns itself up, whereas you would normally get crazy, now, just like that special forces soldier in the heat of the battle of life, you become calmer because you are able to find the stories. You're able to remember the things that remind you of who you are. They say coconut trees, they don't have roots that are as deep as oak trees. Um, um, but if a hurricane comes through, you look at the oak tree and you look at the coconut tree. The coconut tree, the oak tree is just on its face, roots exposed. You know what I mean? But the coconut tree, you look at them, they bend. Yeah, they may even after the storm, they may even bend all the way over to the they're bending at 3 o'clock, but they never uproot.
Yeah.
And the reason why they don't uproot is because coconut tree grows in community.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't even know that. Oh,
Coconut,
that's
yeah.
powerful.
Look at coconut trees, they grow in community. And what happens is underneath the ground, all of their roots link up.
Together. So that's what that's.
Yeah, they link up. So no matter how much they bend on the top, underneath they're holding strong.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Life is bending them up here, but their roots are reminding them of who they are.
mm,
Yeah.
mm.
Life is bending
No,
them on the top, but their roots are reminding them of who they are. So they'll bend, but they'll never uproot. I was in, where was I? Where was I? I was in Fiji. I was in Fiji last year, and we was driving past this place at the beach, and I'm telling you, I wish I would have taken pictures of these trees. Girl, when I tell you that these trees were bent, forget 3 o'clock, they were bent at 5 o'clock. I mean, they were on there. You know, I mean, some of them was like, I don't, they were bent in just grotesque ways, but none of them were uprooted. And I was like, look at that.
coconut tree
They're in community.
community.
And that's where resilience, I say, and I'll say it and I mean it. You know, the biblical instruction is this: two are better than one, for they
Mm,
have returned for their labor. For if the
mhm,
one falls, the other can help them up. But woe
mm.
to the person who, when they fall, have no. They say a two-strand knot is easily broken, but a three-strand
Mm, not easily.
cannot be.
Not
Yeah, yeah.
easily.
And
Not
so the
easily.
idea of the idea is community. The idea is the linkage of the three. The idea is
Yeah.
interdependence. And
Yeah.
that's where resilience is in that space. And so it is a matter of finding community. It is a matter
Finding,
of creating community. It's a
creating.
matter of attaching yourself to community. It's a matter of being community and
Mm,
being the type of community that somebody else needs to find. I
mm,
don't
mm,
just want, as a man, as a husband, as a father, I don't want to, as a son, I don't just want to find a good community as Eddie Hypolite. I actually want to be a good community that another man is looking.
oh yeah, absolutely,
I
absolutely,
want
and
to
that's why
be
I
the
love doing
solid
groups.
community that another brother is looking for.
Yeah, that's why I love doing groups because it gives people opportunities to see what safe community can look like, to
Mm,
understand what they want from community, to practice, to practice that.
absolutely.
That is such a powerful analogy with the coconut tree coming from the Caribbean and seeing coconut trees in storms. I have a mental picture of what you're talking about, what it does in the storm. But the root system, because
The
they're
root system is
interlinked,
all
it's
connected.
that's the secret sauce, the root system, the community that holds it together. And there's another thing that you said as we were doing resilience and we're wrapping up that and we call this resourcing somebody. So you said if you don't have any good experiences or memories of your past, I'm paraphrasing what you said earlier, that the community can reflect things to you about you that you can't see yourself.
That's right.
And that's the powerful thing about community, and that's what we call a resource. So if you're struggling with, well, there's anything, and these stories are still shaping you, and the trauma is telling stories through you,
Mm,
then your community can give you things about yourself that you would never, you can't
exactly.
see,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't see. And
And they
that's
will now
that's
become the stories of you and the stories
yeah,
for you. Yeah, yeah,
absolutely, yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, Eddie, thank you so much. I know this conversation could go on, and there's so much about this that we could say, and I feel
I'm,
myself
I'm glad
expanding.
you're being disciplined and stopping it, because I know when I get with you, listen, we could I'm looking at this and seeing 58 minutes and I'm like,
Yeah,
already?
that
Like,
went fast. That
hold
went
on, we
fast.
just started 20 minutes ago. We're chatting about. So like,
There
I
you
know me
go.
and you, we could chat all day, man. We
We,
could
we
do we could do a 12-hour between the two of us.
we could easily, easily, easily. And I mean, this topic is so pivotal
Mm,
and beautiful. And I'm integrating this in my inner child healing
mm,
coaching program as I am expanding around this area. As I said, I'm taking my father off his pedestal, and I talked about that yesterday in the podcast. Because I think when we allow ourselves to be able to have these kind of authentic conversations and do the work in community, then we realize the strength that we have. And if I want to leave you with anything, is find community, create community, be a community,
that's right.
so that they can reflect back to you your strength, your determination, your
Mm,
courage. And remember that vulnerability you can have you're only strong when you're vulnerable.
Mm.
And that
Yeah.
if that's scary for you, then
Mm.
that's something that needs to be worked through. Like, oh, why am I afraid of being vulnerable? And that's the only place that strength lies.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Where can people find you?
You can find me across social media. You can find me at Eddie Hypolite. As my name is spelled there. I am on Insta. I'm on Facebook, on LinkedIn. Um, where else am I? Um, uh, uh, I don't use TikTok much, but the three places that I am is Insta, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
Yeah.
You can go to my website, which is EYR Ltd, EYRlimited.com, EYRlimited.com, and you can, inform yourself of the work that I do and how I might be able to help you and your teams and your organizations. Um, yeah, it's that's where those are all the places you can find me.
Yeah.
Um, you can find the podcast. We just finished season of 4 questions. Also, you can find the ebook. The ebook is a free ebook, and there's an audio book as well. But do the work. I'm
Do
looking
the
into
work.
the camera now. Do the work. Don't listen and run. Hold up and do the work.
Do the work.
Yeah,
It's about the work.
yeah,
I put the link for the podcast below in the description of this video.
yeah,
And I use Eddie's podcast as like my personal development day, right? Let's get the journal, let's sit with the podcast, and let's answer these questions because there's
yeah.
work to be done at the end of
Thank
it,
you.
but really good work. So
Thank
do
you.
the work. Thank you, everyone. I noticed people were here live and people were commenting. They love the topic, they love the conversation, and we love having the conversation. Thank you so much, Eddie. As I was listening to, I'm just hoping that a cross section of people will listen to this. Women who are the story of Daddy, men who are still trapped in the story of he wasn't around and who was he and who am I as a result of that. And I hope that that piece that you shared about what God told you to do and the people that He put around your life will be a means of encouraging someone to know that they don't have to be trapped in the story of the past, that they can grow and move forward. Any last thing you want to say before we wrap up?
Listen, remember when life writes you off, God writes you the bigger pen. Yeah,
Bigger
you get to tell the stories of you. You get to tell the stories for you. They don't come for free though. You have to do the work.
do the
Yeah,
work.
but they
Yeah,
will come. They'll
they
and
will.
they'll come through other people. They'll come through situations. We can be the fathers we deserve to see. Why?
Mm,
Because we
that's it.
deserve to see them. We deserve to see them as children. We deserve to see them, so we can be them. We can be them.
That's powerful. And as you're doing it for your children, you're witnessing it for yourself.
Children, we deserve to see. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you again, Eddie. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. We hope that you'll join us on the next story.